Hey everybody, we made it to the end of Series 1, the basic level of sentences. This is episode 6, and you may have noticed that I'm wearing my guitar player's hat, and you might be wondering why. Well, in fact, it will become important right after the theme song. Episode 6, Imitation is the sincerest form of learning. You've probably heard the cliche that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And usually when people say that cliche, they've been caught pretending to be someone or something they're not, and they're trying to get out of trouble. But I actually mean this quite sincerely. I want to leave you at the end of this series with something positive, something proactive that you can do to think about your writing before it happens, rather than reactive to go back and look at your writing after it's happened to look for things you can fix and make better. The reason why I'm wearing my guitar player hat today, and I've got the guitar, is that I actually want to tell you a story about imitation and learning that. I know a lot of you are already like, oh, click, but hear me out. It's not a long story, and it directly relates. I didn't learn how to play guitar until I was in college. And I could have picked up the guitar and tried something like this. Until I hit upon something that vaguely sounded like music. But I didn't, because I knew, number one, that would be a really stupid way to learn guitar, and number two, my roommate Josh would have killed me. Hi, Josh. Instead, what I did was I went down to the local music store, and this was back in the last millennium when we had music stores, and I bought a book. This was back in the last millennium when we had books, and it was a book of songs by John Lennon. This was back in the, you know what, you can Google later. I'll even put a link in the description. What I liked about that book is not only did it have all the lyrics and it had the melody line written out on the staff, but over that melody line, it had a chord diagram. Basically, it was this end of the guitar with dots where my fingers needed to be when I strummed in order to play that song. So I was able to, with no professional training, imitate John Lennon, because these were all songs that I knew. I knew what they should sound like. Now that I had a chord diagram, it got easier for me to imitate. So I learned a G chord. And then I learned a C chord. And I'll admit, it wasn't that hard to do at first. Things got more complicated though. And eventually I had the G and the C down enough that I could move on to other things. And the whole point of me telling you this story is not to say that now, today, as a guitar player, I just go around imitating John Lennon. I don't. For two reasons. Number one, I don't own the rights to Imagine by John Lennon, and if I were to write a song that had the same chords and the same melody as Imagine by John Lennon, I would get the pantsuit off of me. And remember, folks, I am a public school teacher who makes internet videos on the side. I do not have pants replacement kind of money. But the biggest reason why I don't write songs that sound just like John Lennon's Imagine is that if I ever played that song for other people, they would rip me apart. They would be, why are you just imitating John Lennon? Who do you think you are? Do you think you are John Lennon? You are not John Lennon. And believe me, I know I am not John Lennon. Instead, what I got out of imitating John Lennon was a set of tools. I learned these different chords in these different patterns, and it gave me the tools that I needed to start writing my own songs, because I can put these chords in a different order, and I can put a very different melody over it, and I've got an original composition. Because when you think about it, imitation is the way we learn naturally. We are literally born with not just the ability but the instinct to imitate. How do you think you learned to speak your parents' language? Is it because they threw a book at you and said, here, this will teach you to speak our language? Is it because they stood up at the front of the room and yelled at you because you weren't speaking their language soon enough or well enough? No, it's because you walked around for a couple of years going ba 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 goo goo goo, imitating their speech. And eventually it went from baby talk to something like, you can't tell me what time to come home, I'm grown. Think about your hobbies, right? This is another good way to realize that imitation is a good way to learn. Let's say you, like me, play an instrument. Maybe you play the flute or the violin, or maybe you're a pianist. And yes, I know how that sounds. But you imitated somebody. Your piano teacher banged out a scale, and you imitated that scale. Maybe you prefer sports. There's, baseball, basketball, football, other football, tennis. I'll talk about tennis. If you wanted to learn tennis as a kid, you went and found yourself a tennis racket and a tennis ball, went outside and hit that ball up against the side of the house 100 times. Or, maybe you couldn't find a tennis racket and a tennis ball, and you found a frying pan and an apple, and you hit it once. But the whole point is that you were imitating. You'd seen the tennis on television, you'd seen the basketball on television or live, and you were imitating what you saw. And if you really wanted to go into it, you found yourself a professional to help you. You joined a team of other basketball players that had coaches, and you imitated those coaches. You imitated the better players. You found yourself a music teacher who could be more advanced than the music teacher that you were leaving behind. You found yourself a tennis coach who would throw the ball up in the air, and you would imitate. You know what? I'm getting really worked up about this. How about you meet me outside on my soapbox?
I'm sorry I had to get out here on my soapbox, but this is important to me, not just as some random guy making funny videos on the internet, but as a teacher. Because do you know how teachers learn to teach? We imitate. When we're college students, we go sit in the classrooms of qualified professional teachers. And then when it's our turn, we get up in front of a classroom and we imitate what we've seen those teachers do. We even imitate the teachers that we remember from high school who were really cool and inspired us to go into teaching in the first place. That's how teachers learn, but that's not how teachers teach. One of the biggest problems that I have with the way writing gets taught in America right now is students are not encouraged to imitate. And to be clear, I'm not talking about plagiarism. I'm not suggesting that it is somehow okay to go to the internet and copy and paste and turn it in as your own. What I'm suggesting is that, well, this series is about sentences, so I'll be specific about sentences for a second. I'm suggesting that you find good sentences in the things that you read and you imitate those. It doesn't matter if you're reading a book, if you're reading a website, if you're reading the sports pages because sports ball is your thing. There's a professional author out there who impresses you with the way he or she writes. And teachers, you need to be asking your students to imitate sentences. In fact, I do know that there is a good, strong movement out there for mentor text. And if you're a teacher and you know what I mean when I say mentor text, that's great. Kids are probably learning a lot from you. But if you're a student and you've never heard the words mentor text before, here's what I want you to do. This is your homework at the end of this series. I want you, the next time you're struggling with a writing assignment, I want you to go to your teacher and I want you to say, hey teacher, I'm struggling with this writing assignment. Can I get a mentor text? Because a mentor text is a well-written example of the kind of thing that you are supposed to be writing. Basically, to continue all the metaphors I've been using, the mentor text is your tennis coach.
The mentor text is the John Lennon songbook that shows you where your fingers go to make the chord. So, over the next 30 seconds or so, I'm going to display some of the sentences that I like to have my students imitate. I will give you the original with the citation where that sentence came from, and I'll give you an example that I wrote about a completely different subject. You are welcome to pause this video and write your own imitations of those sentences. In fact, If you did that, I would love to read them down below in the comments. But you can also just keep this video bookmarked, and whenever you need a good sentence in the middle of a paragraph or at the beginning of an essay, because a lot of these work really well for that, you can come back to this. And while those sentences are being shown, I'm going to play some music that I didn't crib from John Lennon. And that's it. I hope you liked those sentences. I hope you can make use of them in your writing. As I said, this is the end of Series 1. There will be a Series 2 about paragraphs, logically. So I'll see you for the next one. You know, for basketball, maybe it's you found a watermelon and an imaginary line up above your parents' garage, and you had a very, very painful evening when your father got home.